8 a.m. in the Mile High City on this Tuesday, November 11th, 2025. Good morning, Denver, Colorado. You've tuned into the Jeff and Bill Show, News Talk 710, KNUS. I'm your co-host, Jeff Hunt, along with Bill Thorpe, bringing you the freshest insights, hottest takes from the right, left, and center. He's carrying over into the next hour. Rich Guggenheim, by the way, his latest book out, Escaping the Rainbow Plantation. You can get on Amazon, and it's all about kind of the break that's happening between the L and the G and the T and the Q that's taking place out there, which is just wild. So he's helping lead that movement with Gays Against Groomers, and he's doing a great job. We're debating gay marriage by that, the decision from the Supreme Court. We'll continue that conversation. Now it's time, though, for news and comment with Blake Olson.
Blake Olson.
Blake Olson, news and comment.
Good morning. It is Veterans Day, 50 and partly cloudy in Denver, expecting a high of 70 today. News sponsored by Pastor Camp Heating and Air Conditioning at 303-777-1234 to learn more about special savings opportunities on Lennox equipment. Our top story, if you're headed to DIA this morning, know that airlines are increasing the number of canceled flights across the country today. Reductions of flights increased to 6% today and will increase to 10% by Friday. However, the Schumer shutdown is nearing an end with a spending measure now in the hands of the House. The Senate voted last night to end the record-breaking shutdown and reopen federal agencies by passing the bipartisan bill after 8 Democrats joined Republicans to break the stalemate. This thing will hopefully be officially over by Thursday so the commies can concentrate on the next thing on their list to try and destroy the country. The president marking Veterans Day with a visit to Arlington National Cemetery, laying a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier and delivering remarks. Jenna Ellis, who was recently pardoned by DJT, on with Jeff and Billy last hour. She was a victim of the weaponization of justice and the horrific things that happened a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, and beyond. And when she found out about the pardon, unfortunately, it did not feel like one of those TV commercials.
You know, I really wish that it was like Publishers Clearinghouse, where like they show up with like the giant pardon check and like the balloons and everything. That would have been fantastic, and that wouldn't have been so Trumpian in like the Trumpian fashion.
Yes.
But it was actually way less cool than that. I just got a phone call actually from one of his former lawyers who had been working on this along with the pardon attorney, Ed Martin.
That was horrible what she went through. Thanks to the corruptocrats. Thankfully, she was pardoned. No injuries were reported last night after a small plane made an emergency crash landing near the intersection of Wolfensberger Road and Prairie Hawk Drive in Castle Rock. The plane tried to land at Centennial Airport but wasn't able to after it lost power. 3 people were on board, including a child, and it did hit a car in the process. Just a miracle that there were no injuries. Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu rejecting calls for an independent probe into the failures that led to the October 7th attacks. I wonder why. Blake Sifton reports.
Senior Israeli military officers released a review on Monday, finding intelligence officials had failed to recognize Hamas preparations for the October 7th attacks and said there were shortcomings in previous investigations. The chief of staff of the military said an external commission of inquiry should be established.
There's public support for a commission of inquiry, but Netanyahu says that it can only happen after the war in Gaza ends. There's a ceasefire. End it. Opposition leaders have accused Netanyahu of trying to escape accountability. Or is there a lot more to what happened that day? Stay tuned. Broncos linebacker Alex Singleton. This is a great story. He had a testicular cancerous tumor removed the day after the Broncos beat the Raiders on Thursday Night Football. Singleton says that the prognosis is excellent for he and his family, and the Broncos fans can know that he expects to return to the field very soon. Monday Night Football last night, another high-scoring affair. Eagles at the Packers.
43 yards all night. He gets 41 there, the longest play of the game on either side. Shoulder, pump fake, end zone. It is caught for the touchdown, Devontae Smith.
So the reigning world champions, or the Super Bowl champs, Eagles, they win it 10-7 the final. 50 in Lone Tree, 49 in North Glen, 51 in Denver, and you are waking up with Jeff and Bill. It is Tuesday. Blake Olson, News Talk 710 KNUS.
Unseasonably warm November weather will take us through Friday. Then we're going to see some changing weather this weekend, especially late in the weekend and into early next week. But until then, mild Pacific air will dominate. We're going to be 60s to near or better than 70 today, tomorrow, and Thursday. Still very mild, well into the 60s Friday. Through Friday, dry, a mix of high clouds and sun. Nights not bad, 30s to lower 40s. Increasingly cloudy and trending cooler over the weekend, increasing chances for showers. Meteorologist Don Day in the 710 KNUS Weather Center.
Welcome back to the Jeff and Bill Show. We got live in studio with us Rich Guggenheim. He's got a new book, Escaping the Rainbow Plantation. Escaping the Rainbow Plantation dives into the kind of differences taking place between the L, the G, and the B, and then the T and the Q in the movement. Rich, passionate about protecting kids from the efforts taking place by the groomers. I mean, you're part of Gays Against Groomers.
Well,
right?
I talk in this book, this whole movement that we're seeing now was undermined. What I discuss is the foundation of society, and that is the family. And I talk about how this new gender ideology really undermines that foundation, but I also talk about how it's corrupted the pillars of civilization, which is science, media, academia, medicine, and the government. And, off air, we're talking about my lawsuit against the state of Colorado for silencing me because I wasn't going to use respectful language. I was going to refer to a man as a man and use his name, not call him by his trans name and call him a woman. Because that, to me, it is the ultimate insult to women to mock them by approximating them.
I agree. I mean, it's like up there with blackface.
It literally is woman face.
Yeah, right. So help me understand this. We'll jump into the debate, Mr. Thorpe, Mr. Guggenheim.
Yeah.
You guys stand for the pillars of biological realities and the pillars of civilization. I can't think of anything more fundamentally important to civilization than defining marriage as between one man and one woman, pouring male and female aspects into the raising of children. If gay people want to have a relationship, they can. We're not saying that they can't. But tell me why we can't preserve, promote, and encourage marriage as that fact, that pillar of civilization, that biological reality.
Because that hasn't always been the history of marriage. And I know you are going to disagree with that. But more importantly, defining marriage based off of religious texts, in my opinion, that's totally your right. You have the right to define marriage as you see fit. That's your marriage. If you want it to be between a man and a woman, then have it between a man and a woman. But at the end of the day, I don't think that you have the right. And I tell the trannies and I tell the vegans the same thing. You have every right to believe whatever you want to believe in, but you don't get to force those beliefs on other people. I also,
but every law, Rich, is the forcing someone's values upon people. Your belief that we shouldn't force values upon people is a value being forced upon people.
Fair enough. But here's what I would say, though. When you look at this, I look at marriage this way. The marriage is nothing but a contract. In our law,
is not just a contract.
It gives you the right to control another person and their property. And that's what gays and lesbians, I look at it as this way. And by the way, for full disclosure, I did advocate for gay marriage and civil unions. When somebody gets sick, you want to be able to go into the hospital and make a decision for that person. when they pass away, you get to decide what to do with their remains and their property. That is what marriage really ultimately comes down to under law. And so if you want to define religiously, let's go back to that, because that's actually what if you're going to claim to be a conservative, this is where I would say we go back to. If have you ever done any family history, genealogy work? So it's fascinating to me, for me to go back in time. I've traced one line of my family tree goes clear back to like 900. Even though my last name is Guggenheim, I'm actually more of a Wallace, like Sir William Wallace. Yeah. So if you go back in time and you start doing those family history and your genealogy, you get to a certain point where you're no longer going to the government, the county clerk's office to find vital records.
You're going to the church.
You're going to a church or you're going to a synagogue.
Yeah.
So once upon a time, the church was where you went for your record of birth, which was usually done through a christening or a baptism or record of birth, depending on the denomination. There was a record of marriage. If you wanted a divorce, then that was a whole process itself, and we know that because the whole Church of England itself was a church born out of fornication and adultery. And then if you passed away, you had a death and you had a burial record, and that's why back in those days, a lot of cemeteries were right next to churches. Then somewhere along the line, the government was like, holy crap, we're losing out on a whole lot of money, and we should be licensing and regulating this. Why have we ever gotten to the point where we think that the government should be licensing and regulating and generating revenue off of people making a contract with each other?
But you just told me people got to be able to go to visit a hospital and have rights over all this stuff, right?
Do you need to have a marriage to have those rights? No, because back in the day before same-sex marriage was legal, people would go and they would get a commitment ceremony back when apparently gays and lesbians believed in commitment to one another. That's a whole nother beef that I have with the gay community, and we got to have same-sex marriage, but there's so many of them that are in open marriages. Why? You wanted all the legal protections without any of the commitment?
Well, exactly. Because actually they wanted marriage, but they didn't want the moral foundations that come with marriage.
That's not exclusive to gays and lesbians, though, because I know a lot of heterosexuals. Sure. I mean, I talk to people who are even conservative and brag about being in swingers relationships. And I'm like, well, what the heck was the point of getting married if you're going to be open and sharing your partner with who knows who?
I would agree with you on that.
I'm old-fashioned in the fact that I believe even for same-sex couples and heterosexual couples, marriage should be between one man and one man, or one man and one woman, or one woman and one woman. I don't think that when you make that commitment when you say I do, you say I will be faithful and true to that person for better or worse, and in sickness and health, and I will cleave to you and none else. I think we've lost that, and I don't think that's exclusive to same-sex marriage. I think that is a terrible decline in Western values.
Why do you think marriage is so important to Western civilization?
I think it really, when we talk about marriage and we talk about families, you may know Kane from Task Force Freedom. I've talked to him about this. When we talk about the destruction of culture, black culture was an experiment. What do? They remove the father figure from that picture, that equation, remove the fathers. And that's where we've seen so many problems within that particular community, is because they don't have the father figure. And now we're trying to do that in the same thing. And that's why I say that I think that a strong household needs those two parents to bring that up. And people have asked me all the time, like, would you ever have children? I'm like, I would not have children unless I knew that I had a spouse, and my spouse and I could bring that child up in a loving, stable environment. I'm probably going to be the one that's going to be like the dad that's like, absolutely not. Like, I'm going to be like the iron fist father.
But I think, conservatives understand that human nature is naturally chaotic and tribal, right? So if you don't have good guidance on human nature, it devolves. That's why religion's so important to the conservative worldview, is because religion is a good check on human nature. You believe that there's a God. He put together a universal set of laws, and you're going to be held accountable to him, right? And that creates self-restraint in society, which is really important.
In some cases. See, I think, Jeff, when you talk about...
Tell me about the atheists out there that are living highly moral lives.
I don't even have to take it as far as atheists. All I'm going to do is look at some of these progressive Christian churches.
Yeah.
I mean, I literally had this conversation this last week with this church that's trying to be all, oh, you should come to our church. And I'm like, yeah, you literally promote on your church website and on the banner in front of your church that you welcome LGBTQ plus people. I don't. If you believe as a church that God is capable of putting a person in the wrong body, you believe in a God that is fallible and imperfect. And a fallible, imperfect God is not capable of granting eternal life and salvation.
I appreciate that point. But
That's why I don't even have to go into the atheist thing. There are Christians, so-called Christians, that I vehemently disagree with their theology.
That get it wrong. Right. But for going back to the importance of marriage is you have to have institutions that guide the formation of children and families, right? Conservatives are going to go a family with a male, female, in a committed monogamous relationship, so not the open marriages, but builds an institution in itself, which is the family, where those kids are raised up. Look at what God created with marriage. You have two people that are going to spend their fortunes, would be willing to lay down their lives for those children so that they could live, thrive. We get in cars, we drive them everywhere. No state program is ever going to replicate that amount of time and commitment to raising those children.
I guarantee you,
right?
Colorado will try.
Right, yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, and then they'll tax everybody and be like,
I got a question.
Why don't you pay for
I got
that?
a question.
Go ahead.
The two of you have been going back about marriage and the role in raising kids. And it sort of strikes me that maybe the conversation is parallel to the one that we should be having.
About marriage itself.
Yeah, if marriage is such an institution that is important to the raising of children, are we missing the point by trying to regulate marriage? And instead, the point is we need to regulate birth. And what I mean by that is we should then regulate who gets to have the kids. If marriage is so important to raise the kids, isn't the real issue who's having the kids, not who's married?
Well, I want to go back to that bill
Golly,
too.
was Jared Polis going to make that decision? Who makes that decision?
I'm just putting that on the
You're going
table
to
as
have
far as
little
the conversation.
conservatives. You don't get to have more kids.
Well, that's
here's
the issue.
another question though. So if marriage is for the purpose of raising children, what about couples who are infertile? What about the marriage after the wife goes through menopause?
Sure.
Yeah, that's where I was going.
Well, so we're dealing with definitions, right? And when you're dealing with definitions, there's always going to be exceptions to how it doesn't necessarily fit the definition, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the definition in itself is wrong.
So,
right? So
my question then is, where does that definition? Where do you draw the boundaries on where that definition?
What the
begins
intent is?
What is the intent? So
Yeah.
I truly
Well,
believe
no, that's where I draw the line is. Like, what is the intent of the institution of marriage, for instance?
if it's solely for the rearing of children, I would argue then that I see a lot of heterosexual couples who have children that are terrible parents. And I've also seen a lot of heterosexual parents who, yeah, you know what? That's just terrible. And maybe the children ends up in foster care. Maybe the child ends up going out for adoption. I mean, if you're going to argue that
why don't we mandate that once you get married, you have to have kids within a certain time limit, or
you
the
don't
marriage
have
dissolves?
To. But you guys, you guys want to define a
to?
marriage as it relates to just two people. And what I'm saying is that what we want to do is create an institution called the family, where you have mother, father, male, female, committed monogamous, pouring those features into children, dedicated to children. That is an institution in itself. It's called the family, right? That family thrives when marriage is defined as having purpose towards creating that institution. What you guys want to do is what's called revisionist marriage, which is just essentially a contractual relationship between two adults.
No, that exists right now. That's the function of a state.
And then you defined it as marriage, and you go, that is marriage. And I go, that is not marriage.
I know, but then what happens is that becomes a little self-reductive, because really it just becomes a semantic argument. That it's not really being mad about same-sex marriage, it's just mad about the word marriage. And that everything, and this is why I don't necessarily buy into that argument, because I disagree that if we would call what the state views as marriage as anything else, that these arguments would go away. I disagree that Kim Davis would have made a different choice if we would have defined the marriage of the state, the license in which she is supposed to be delivering. If we would have called it something else, I disagree that she would have made a different choice.
I think that the evidence in what Bill is saying also is you would probably be okay if we just called it a civil union, but not a marriage.
I would, in one capacity, yes, but I think the church still serves a prophetic voice and will always serve a prophetic voice into culture going, you shouldn't be in sexual relationships outside of the confines of marriage between one man and one woman. That's it. I mean, and the church is always going to have that perspective. When you talk about
the church, which church? Because there's so many different denominations that have decided to define so many aspects of culture so differently.
I think you could make a very strong case that just a basic reading of the Bible argues that sexual conduct takes place between one man and one woman within the confines of marriage. Going back to the Old Testament, going back to the Ten Commandments.
That didn't happen in the Old Testament.
It did.
I can look at
you're using exceptions to try to argue the rule.
I'm still going to go back to the fact that the entire nation of Israel was born out of polyamory, and that was not condemned by God.
No, I think it totally was.
Oh, well,
and this is what an exegetical debate is. We would go look at scripture and we would argue back and forth who was writing, what was the intent, what was the situation taking place. This is good. We've lost this skill set in our society to try to argue what the Bible actually says.
But it goes back to another point, though, that I would say when we're talking about marriage from the government perspective, and we were just talking about a man and a woman raising children, I've seen terrible men and women raising children in heterosexual relationships. I've also seen lesbian couples and two men raising families in very caring, very nurturing, very healthy family situations. So I don't think that a family needs to be defined as one man and one woman. I went to college with a roommate, and his father was a Mormon polygamist. And you know something? As odd as it was for Mother's Weekend to roll around, and you're like, wow, like 7 women just showed up. Which one is your mother? Like, I still saw the way that they raised those children, whether it was one man and a wife and a wife and a wife, or whether it's a man and a man or a woman and a woman.
Isn't that the exact point? You actually have no definition. So it can be 2 men, it could be 2 women, it could be 1 man, 1 woman, it could be 1 man and 7 women.
It could be Rachel and Leah.
There's actually no definition if that's the case. That's a lack thereof.
That is up to the government to define that.
And who's the government?
That should be elected by us.
Right. So we, the people, using our morals and our values, come into the public square and argue actually what a definition is. And part of the challenge I have with what I would say is the progressive or the revisionist definition of marriage is that it's no definition at all. Tell me why it has to be 2 people.
It doesn't. Biblically.
That was a good line. I'll give you that. That was a good line. And I disagree with it, but that was funny. Bill, why does it have to be 2 people?
Because for me, the idea of a civil union is a 2-person partnership contract, and we can self-define it as such. And again, because I'm going at this as a contractual relationship. And for me, it's the idea of once you bring those 2 entities, whatever they are, together, then they have shared assets. They have shared access to legal systems and laws. And for me, it makes the most sense in a direct partnership. We have different layers of, we have different layers of how when you start a business. There are different sets of liabilities and way you can set up and structure a business. For me, I would structure a civil union or marriage or whatever we want to call it as a contractual relationship between 2 people. If we want to go into something larger, if something like a Mormon wants to look at communal living or the idea of multiple marriages and multiple wives, then we can talk about what that contractual relationship looks like, because it would be different if we were bringing in multiple businesses into this relationship versus if we're just bringing 2 and taking 2 businesses and combining into one.
Why not allow people to have?
Again, I gave that as a possibility, but it would be a different level, just like we have different levels of incorporating a business.
You wouldn't have a problem with it.
I have a little bit of a problem, but here's the idea, is that I don't view the state definition of marriage as the same as biblical marriage. I would never force any religion to recognize or perform a state marriage. And again, I know that these are different ideas and concepts. The state civil union is a different concept. For me, it is 2 individuals because we've defined it as such, and I think that taking some of the religious trappings outside of it is fair, because not everybody will follow the same beliefs in far as religion.
Sure, but we're in a place of no definitions.
Oh, no,
We're
I'm
in a
providing a
place
definition. No, Jeff.
If you want to have seven
no,
people
hang
in a
on.
marriage,
No,
yeah,
I
go
am
for
providing
it.
a very direct definition of two
but
people
you can't
entering
define
into
why. Because you're saying there's two people because there's two people.
I'm saying two people because what they're doing is they're getting access to the laws and they're sharing those assets. It is like starting a.
Why
Wait,
not
hang on a
three?
sec.
Why not three? Why not four?
Hang on a sec, though. We can talk about that being different as far as starting a business or other liabilities, because again, I'm viewing this as a contractual relationship. Just like we have different levels of when we incorporate businesses, there are limited liabilities, there's incorporation, there's a whole bunch of other things there. So you can have a different definition based on you starting your own business or corporation. There are a variety of definitions. I'm okay with where we are right now, having the definition for civil union being two people based on how it's defined. If we want to create, because I think it functions best where we're defining it right now. If we want to expand that, we can have that debate. But again,
I think we
it
are.
would be. I don't think
But
we are. I don't think. No,
you-
Jeff, hang on a
you
sec.
go-
Jeff, I don't think that the same-sex marriage argument is about getting 7 people married or marrying your dog. I think it's different because you're talking about joining of 2 people in that contractual relationship.
I know
I
you
think
keep
it's
saying
fair.
that, Bill. You keep saying it. It's about 2 people. It's about
Yeah.
2 people, and I'm asking you why it has to be 2 people. And you go because it's 2 people.
No. The reason is because right now, civil union and the access to that is defined as far as 2 people, and we're getting them unique access to legal laws and sharing of assets.
Bill,
That-
you just
hang on
keep
a sec.
going back. It's because
Jeff,
it's 2 people. It's 2
Jeff,
people. It's because
Jeff,
it's 2 people.
Hang on a sec. Just like we have defined how you incorporate businesses differently. Because based on the liability you want to take on, based on the number of people involved, based on partnerships, all of that is defined differently. So I'm leaning on that idea. If we want to define different partnerships different ways, I'm open to the discussion. But right now, civil union is 2 people. If you want to define it into more, we can talk about what the advantages, disadvantages, what the legal implications of that look like. How do you split
And
assets?
you don't see any problem with that. Since we're not going to actually jump into defining that because you keep saying, we could talk
Jeff,
about it.
No, Jeff, I have defined it.
me.
No, Jeff, I have defined it right now as a contractual relationship between 2 people.
And then when I
if
ask you
want to-
why, you say it's because
Yeah.
it's a contractual
And the
relationship between people.
hang
It's
on
a
sec.
circular
And
definition.
no,
We're
it's-
going around. We've been
no,
doing this
Jeff,
for like last 5
Jeff,
minutes.
no, I'm not. I'm saying that just like within business, there are different ways we can incorporate a business. We don't sit there and say, well, how come you want to have an incorporation versus a limited liability corporation? There's different levels. So we can talk about that right now.
I
That's
think
the one
you
that
guys
exists.
have been very helpful.
I think I should have brought some popcorn for this.
in helping clarify that you guys actually have no definition of marriage. Go ahead.
I do have a definition of marriage, and my definition of marriage just doesn't happen to include one man and one woman, or the fact. I think marriage is a business contract. From a government perspective, it's a business contract, and I go back to the fact that I don't think that marriage should be something government regulates in any way for anyone. If you want to get married, you go down to your church and you go down to your synagogue, and your church and your synagogue or your mosque or whatever you go to, your temple has the right to define marriage however they want based off of their interpretation of their scripture.
And Western civilization does not function with these types of unclear definitions. Western civilization requires a healthy definition of marriage between one man and one woman in a committed monogamous relationship, pouring into their children, male and female tributes and attributes. And at the same time, when you don't get that definition right, when you don't get definitions, period, right, in this society, you end up with men and women's sports. It's all linked to me because we're not clear and we're not correct on our definitions.
That is what we call a slippery slope logical fallacy also, Jeff.
No, it's the exact Bill. Rich, I'm used to it. That's like it's like it jumps right out of my mouth when even at home when I'm
sure it does.
debating
Yes.
with
Do you
Nicole.
like yell out every name of your child before you get to the right one?
No, he starts
Exactly.
with my name. That's what he's mad at most of the time.
Look at the exact result, Rich, of the slippery slope. We started with gay marriage, and I got dudes running in women's sports.
Are you sure it's a dude?
Oh, yeah, 100%.
You can't misgender them. That's a hate crime in Colorado now.
Hey,
Free speech.
Rich, you are a gift. I had so much fun.
Yes, this is
Thank
great.
you. This was a lot of fun. Rich Guggenheim, get his book, Escaping the Rainbow Plantation. You can get it at Amazon. And I appreciate you so much coming in, having a fun, spirited debate on the Jeff and Bill show, because this doesn't happen anywhere else.
Yes, thank you so
Thanks
much.
for inviting me.
Yeah. And Rich, what's your X account so people can follow you there?
Escaping TRP. Escaping TRP.
Escaping the Rainbow Plantation.
Correct.
Escaping TRP.
Yeah, I couldn't come up
There
with
you
the
go.
whole thing.
Yeah, on X.
The free
It's
speech plantation.
Nice.
You're great. Thank you so much. Thank you to Bill. Feel free to join the conversation now, 303-696-1971, or text us on the Dan Caplis Law text line, 720-819-5115. You're listening to The Jeff and Bill Show.
This is Denver's talk leader, News Talk 710, KNUS.
Welcome back to the Jeff and Bill show. We jumped in a time capsule and went back about a decade.
That was interesting.
Because those were at one point the hottest debates.
Yeah.
Was on the definition of marriage. Now I'm like, hello.
I know. It's
I'm like a
interesting
voice wandering
changed.
in the wilderness.
Yeah.
Read the Bible.
Yeah. Because I still remember, and this is years and years ago, when this thing was really, really hot. I was doing some fill-in work on KFBK in Sacramento. People recognize those set of call letters only because that's where Rush Limbaugh got his start. And I was filling in the afternoons for a week. Their guy was out, so I was doing it. And there was a big thing about gay marriage that broke from the California State Supreme Court. And so that was 4 hours of full lines. And boy, have the conversations changed. Yeah.
I haven't changed, but y'all have. But I joke. Text messages not on
I'm
this
still
one.
in the same thing because back then in KFBK, I was making the civil contract argument.
Yeah.
And it was very interesting because the guy that was the newsman in Sacramento that night called my program director at 9:30. 7:30 at night. I dropped at 7. He got on at 7:30 at night and called my program director and goes, who the hell was that? Because I had gotten several callers to agree with me, and they had never agreed with anybody else before. And they were like, what just happened? What just happened?
Text messages hot on this one. Jeff, we don't live in a theocracy. A marriage is a commitment to another person. Why, I would ask? If you have no definition, we just dance around whatever definition we want. My wife cannot have children, but we've been committed to each other for 28 years. That is a marriage, I would agree. And neither of us takes a religious or biblical worldview in order for it to be committed. Terry, I disagree. I actually think that your foundation is actually strongly influenced by biblical values. You may not acknowledge them, but for instance, the idea of remaining committed in your marriage, not practicing adultery, is a religious value. Now, you could say, but it's not required that you be religious to practice it. Yes, that's true. But it's rooted, and its influence on culture comes from biblical teaching. Because if you want to go back to Roman and Greece time frames, they were a little bit more cavalier in their lifestyle.
Now, if the texture isn't raising children, are they fulfilling the purpose of marriage in your mind?
It is a marriage, but if we're talking about its overall intent as a definition, right? It is society, why society's interested in marriage is because it becomes the institution by which you raise up your future citizens. So,
but if someone isn't, does it then matter? Should they even be married?
Yeah, of course, because
Why?
there's still a monogamous and a commitment aspect of it. So again, this is what I keep trying to remind people is we're dealing with a definition here. So if I say, for instance, Bill, a human being has 2 arms and 2 legs, and that becomes a definition as opposed to a fish that doesn't have 2 arms and 2 legs, and then you go, well, what about someone who loses a leg? I go, no, they're still a human being, but we're talking about the definition of what the entity is as opposed to other things.
However, I think when you say the purpose of this entity is, and then others don't, that hurts the argument. Because if the purpose is to raise up the next generation of citizens,
I said that's why the state's interested in its
people.
Purpose.
But you also talked about inside of religion that raising a family is important, and if they aren't raising a family, they're not performing the core function of what a marriage is. So should we just dissolve that relationship or not allow them in the future to get married?
No, but I think you're missing a lot of other aspects of the full definition, right? So look, in the definition of marriage, you have a male, he has certain body parts. Female, they have certain body parts. They tend to work together. What is the function and core of those body parts working together? Is it just to reproduce kids? No, of course not. There's pleasure involved with it. There's a commission of enjoyment of an aspect of strengthening the relationship that takes place as a result of consummating a marriage, right? But you would also say that definitionally, part of the point of the body parts you have and the body parts your wife has is to create children. You wouldn't say it's exclusively and only to that, but you would say it's core function
but if it's
is for that.
But if the core function, you said the core function isn't to get busy. It's not that to bump uglies. The core function is to raise a family and to do that. And so that's when we define marriage as having the core function of raising kids, I think that hurts the definition of marriage, because it then would invalidate any other relationship that's either outside of.
Invalidate that?
Sure it does, because they're not doing the core function.
That.
No, they're not doing the core function. And here's the idea: if you have a car that is in your driveway and it has no tires, no wheels, no engine, don't really have much of a car. The core function of that car is to car. And so you can talk about the fact that it's not working. You don't really have a car. You can't say, let's take my car anywhere. You have pieces of something, but you don't have a car. And that's
you're
why
actually
the idea
making my argument.
Yeah, no, but the idea is if it's the core function, then does it matter? And so the idea is, I think that's why civil unions can hold, because the contractual relationship and other things that are outside of that raising of a child are covered inside of the civil marriage. So I disagree with the idea that raising kids is a core function of marriage.
Raising kids is not a core function of marriage.
I disagree that being the core function. Yeah, I think there are other things involved, and it doesn't have to be. I think that's part of it. It's an important part of it, but I don't think it's the core. I wouldn't put that as number one, personally. That's personally.
Yeah, I think that's revisionist. And what you find, you guys, is what was perfectly on display, in my opinion, was that there's no real definitions. And so that really clearly explains the culture that we're in right now, right? Because as a Christian, I would say the activity of sex, for instance, takes place within marriage, because the core purpose of that is not just my pleasure. While there's definitely a pleasurable aspect to it, the core purpose of it is the production and the creation of children. Right? And that became the Christian teaching in all this. Because, look, we're not the only culture. America's not the only culture that kind of moved away from the biblical definitions of this. Rome, Greece, all over the world, right, has embraced sexual activity, embraced relationships without necessarily the teachings that come from the Bible. And the Bible speaks into this and says, like Jesus said, right, that the point of marriage is that a male and female leave their parents, form a new entity. That new entity produces children. That entity raises the children. That's a good thing. Your sexual activity takes place within the confines of marriage. There are strict definitions in the Christian worldview. What you get outside that was fully on display, Bill, where there's essentially no definitions. Well, right? You want to have 7 people in a marriage? Fine. You want to have sex with whoever you want? Fine. It's just kind of bounces around. And you do what the Bible says is right in your own eyes.
Well, the thing is that inside of Scripture, though, I don't find times in which not having kids inside a marriage invalidates the marriage, nor is it dissolved if you don't.
Never said it did.
But hang on. If it is the core purpose, and that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for something inside of it that retains it being the core purpose, that if it doesn't fulfill this core purpose, then marriage doesn't exist. And over the course of religion, marriage still existed even without that core purpose. So I disagree that core purpose is necessarily fundamental to the marriage. It is a benefit. It does help, but it doesn't mean that it defines what the marriage is. That means, and the reason why that's important is that means people that may not be able to have kids, people that are outside the window of when they would be fertile, or just those individuals that choose not to have kids, they can still have a fully realized marriage without that. That's why I think it's important.
Bill, what is the intent of a uterus?
To give birth to kids, probably.
Okay. If it doesn't have a child in it, is it no longer a uterus?
No, not necessarily.
I rest my point.
In what way, though? But
I rest my case. You just proved that if it doesn't serve its core function, it's no longer it loses its definition. And I just proved to you that it maintains its definition even if it doesn't have its core purpose.
No, but actually what it does is the uterus, even though it's not being used, can actually facilitate children. So it doesn't necessarily invalidate the fact that the uterus exists, nor the core purpose.
We talked about names and core purposes. And if it doesn't work, is it no longer a uterus?
But inside a marriage, and that's kind of what I'm looking at, is that individuals that aren't using that uterus to produce children still can be married, and it seems that goes against your core definition.
Oh, it can maintain its definition even if it's not fully functioning the way it was intended. That's what I've always said.
Then why can't we have a civil union that does the same thing as well? Why can't we have it? If it fulfills the same basic functions as the other marriage, why can't it inside the law?
I think you're finally agreeing to the fact that it's not a marriage.
No, not at all. I'm saying that the civil union seems to then tick off all the boxes that you're looking at. So I don't understand the delineation of the problem between the two. Why we can't have a civil union? Is it just, again, does it come back to the semantic argument that you're okay with the civil union?
No, the clear definition of it. I just don't know what you're arguing, because you've also argued that marriage or civil unions can be between like 7 people.
I said that we'd have to talk about what that looks like, just because of incorporation and how we build businesses. If it's the idea of getting access to certain laws and shared responsibility and liabilities, we can talk about what that may look like. But right now, no. Right now, it is a contract that's between 2 people, just like we have S corporations and other ways you can incorporate a business. They're not all the same. So that's it. To me, it's still an access to contractual law and shared liabilities. And that seems okay.
Jacqueline is texting us, telling us to stay out of her uterus.
That's funny.
All right. Welcome back to the debate that took place 10 years ago on gay marriage, but the Supreme Court denying to hear Kim Davis's. I still think that the decision, we didn't get this with Rich, but you could look at the way it was decided, just like you looked at the way Roe v. Wade was decided and go, this isn't in the Constitution, and be overturned. On that, John Roberts made that argument. So we'll see if there's another case that pops up on that. And what will that do to gay marriage? And could they just pass amendments in each of the states to make it legal these days? Feel free to join the conversation. 303-696-1971. Text us on the Dan Caplis Law text line, 720-819-5115. You're listening to The Jeff and Bill Show.
This is Denver's Talk Leader, News Talk 710, KNUS.
Welcome back to the Jeff and Bill Show. Gabe texting in wondering, why is it that Republicans always got to talk about these losing battles? That's my job. That's what I do in this state. I'm the one who told you that sports gambling was stupid. I was right on that. I was the one that told you that marijuana was stupid. I was right on that. I'm the ones that tell you that men and women's sports is stupid and that marriage is between one man and one woman in a committed relationship with the point of having an institution to raise children. And I'll just sing it from the rooftops. I'll wander around in the wilderness all by myself, being John the Baptist. So, Gabe, that's why God put me in your life, Gabe, to be a prophet.
Excellent.
And Bill's too. And God put Bill in my life to challenge.
Yes, exactly. I'm your daily challenge. I'm your penance. I don't know what you did, but boy, you did something bad at some point.
Bill, do you think that while the Supreme Court disregarded Kim Davis's case, do you think they'll come back with another case? Because look, John Roberts wrote a dissent to Obergefell, and Justice Thomas has said it's bad law. So they're just waiting for the right case to come along? And then what happens?
Yeah, I do believe that there is appetite for them to overturn it, which, again, that's going to be very interesting as far as what that means. And I don't know. I don't know where it would go from there, because then you would have to turn and tell a whole bunch of couples that have been married for a number of years that, nope, yours doesn't matter. Yours didn't exist, and you can't do that anymore. And so there's going to be a whole series of legal fallout and issues that are created therein that
It'd be like Roe v. Wade, the overturning Roe v. Wade, and all the legal issues that came from that, right?
This would be even more because in my mind is the person that has had the abortion in 1995, that is done as far as, the procedure. Someone that got married after Obergefell would still be married right now. So it would be a dissolution of that partnership. That's something that I think is totally different. And I think that's a different.
It would depend on the state.
It would depend. It's again, if it's federal, that would really be an issue. So that's
but we
kind of
don't
the
have
issue
federal
there.
marriages.
No, but it's but again, Obergefell though gives purpose for that, so it would invalidate necessarily across the country. It could invalidate some of those laws because, again, if Obergefell is invalidated, you're going to tell me that a state that has a gay marriage law wouldn't see that challenged in court immediately? That you wouldn't have people? Absolutely, it would. Absolutely, it would. And so that's the issue.
You think wait, what? In the state, like if it was passed and put in the state constitution, for instance,
yes.
You think it would get challenged?
Yes. Yeah, I do. I do think so. That it
because
would get
the challenge to the Supreme Court is that it's not in the Constitution. Like that they jumped ahead and did what the Supreme Court used to do, which was make legislation just appear out of nowhere. So what would the challenge be if it's in law?
The challenge would be based on, it depends on how the Obergefell and the overturning of the law would be written. It depends on what it is, because if they go through it and say there's no legal right inside the Constitution to do X, Y, and Z, then the lawsuits would be that the state Constitution is going against certain things that happen in the U.S. Constitution. That's where it would go. That's how. I mean, that's what the challenge would be.
Yeah, I just don't see it. I don't think there would be state-based challenges, at least the same way.
Oh, yeah,
I
absolutely.
mean, for instance, the constitutional challenge on abortion, for instance, is that the child has a right to life. So,
but the idea is if it is a challenge to like the Colorado State Supreme Court and Colorado rules, and then you appeal, where does it go?
But it would be it'd be an interpretation of the Colorado law. Anyways, well, we'll continue, and since Bill and I, neither of us have law degrees, that was probably not best to provide constitutional advice. All right. We're going to talk with Kelly Swan, fill in the void. Up next, you're listening to The Jeff and Bill Show.
This is KNUS.